Ethan Vance was a man carved from the rugged Montana landscape he inhabited. 2 years had passed since the accident, but the grief remained a constant, chilling companion, a phantom limb he could never quite adjust to. Whispering Pines, his sprawling ranch nestled amidst the majestic Rockies, was once a testament to love and burgeoning dreams. Now, it was a mausoleum of memories, each creaking floorboard, each gust of wind through the pines, an echo of what he had lost, his beloved wife, Sarah, and their infant son, Liam. The vastness of the ranch, once a source of pride, now amplified his profound loneliness, swallowing him whole in its desolate embrace. He moved through his days with a practiced stoicism, his hands, once gentle with Sarah, now calloused from endless labor. The cattle were tended, the fences mended, the land worked with a relentless, almost punishing efficiency. But beneath the surface, a raw wound festered, untouched by time or toil. He rarely spoke, his conversations limited to terse instructions to his ranch hands or solitary murmurs to the ghosts that populated his home. The laughter that once filled these rooms had been replaced by a silence so profound it hummed. 50 miles away, in the quaint, close-knit town of Harmony Creek, Clara Jenkins navigated a different kind of desolation. Recently orphaned after her grandmother, the last of her kin, had passed, Clara found herself adrift. The small cottage, once a haven of warmth and familiar scents, now felt cold and empty. But a far greater burden weighed on her young shoulders, a secret that threatened to unravel her already fragile existence. She was pregnant. The news had hit her like a physical blow, a cruel twist of fate after so much loss. The father, a charming drifter named Rodrick, had vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Clara to face the consequences alone. In Harmony Creek, a town where reputations were meticulously guarded and whispers traveled faster than the wind, an unmarried, pregnant woman was an anomaly, an outcast. The judging glances, the hushed conversations, the subtle but undeniable shift in how people treated her, it was a slow, agonizing ostracization. She saw her future, once filled with quiet hopes, dissolving into a bleak landscape of shame and solitude. Pastor Thomas Miller was a man whose wisdom was as deep as his compassion. He had known Ethan's late wife, Sarah, a vibrant woman whose faith had been unwavering, and Clara's grandmother, a pillar of the Harmony Creek community. He saw the pain in both their lives, 2 souls adrift in a sea of sorrow, and a daring idea began to form in his mind. One crisp autumn afternoon, he drove his old Ford pickup to Whispering Pines. Ethan, surprised by the visit, offered him a cup of coffee, his usual gruff demeanor softened slightly by the pastor's gentle presence. Pastor Miller spoke of Clara, of her recent losses, and then, with a careful choice of words, of her predicament. He proposed a solution, one that seemed audacious, almost scandalous, yet held a strange logic. Clara, he explained, was an excellent housekeeper, diligent and quiet. She needed a home, protection, and a name for her child. Ethan, he gently reminded, needed someone to bring life back into his desolate home, to manage the household that had fallen into disarray since Sarah's passing. Ethan's initial reaction was a storm of anger and disbelief. He, a grieving widower, to take in a pregnant woman. It felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory, an affront to his sorrow. But Pastor Miller, with quiet persistence, appealed to his innate sense of duty, a flicker of honor that still burned beneath the ashes of his grief. He spoke of Sarah's kindness, of her belief in second chances, of the good Ethan still possessed. Slowly, reluctantly, a seed of consideration took root. The ranch was indeed falling apart, and the silence was deafening. Perhaps, he reasoned, a practical arrangement, devoid of emotion, could bring some semblance of order back to his chaotic life. He agreed, his voice flat, his heart still a fortress. Months unfolded in a strained, silent rhythm at Whispering Pines. Clara moved through the vast house like a shadow, her presence barely acknowledged by Ethan. He retreated further into his work, finding solace in the physical demands of ranch life, while Clara meticulously restored order to the neglected home. The scent of fresh-baked bread replaced the dust of disuse, and a quiet hum of activity slowly began to permeate the once silent rooms. Yet, a chasm remained between them, a silent agreement to coexist without true interaction. Ethan saw her as a necessary fixture, a solution to a problem, nothing more. Clara, in turn, saw him as her reluctant benefactor, a man consumed by a grief she dared not disturb. Her pregnancy, though carefully concealed beneath loose-fitting clothes, progressed steadily. The secret, a heavy weight, pressed down on her, a constant reminder of her precarious position. One evening, as Clara reached for a high shelf, a sudden movement caused her loose apron to shift, revealing the undeniable curve of her belly. Ethan, entering the kitchen unexpectedly, froze. His eyes, usually distant and clouded with sorrow, widened in shock, then narrowed with a cold fury. The truth, stark and undeniable, hung in the air between them. "You're pregnant," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. He felt a surge of betrayal, a sense of being manipulated. He had offered her shelter, and she had brought a deception into his home. Clara, her face pale, could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. She braced herself for his wrath, for the inevitable expulsion from the only sanctuary she had found. But as his anger simmered, another emotion began to stir within Ethan, a deep-seated sense of honor. He remembered Pastor Miller's words, the unspoken promise of protection. He saw not just a deception, but a vulnerable woman, alone and facing ruin. The thought of her being cast out, of the child bearing the stigma of illegitimacy, stirred something within him, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He would not let Harmony Creek tear her down. He would claim the child as his own, a shield against the world's harsh judgment. It was a decision born not of love, but of a grim, unyielding sense of duty. The declaration, though made with a stern resolve, did little to bridge the emotional distance between them. Ethan maintained his aloofness, his claim a matter of principle rather than affection. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred. He no longer saw Clara merely as a housekeeper. She was now inextricably linked to his future, to the fragile life growing within her. He found himself observing her more closely, noticing the quiet strength in her movements, the gentle way she hummed lullabies as she worked. He even began to leave small, practical gifts for her, a warmer shawl, a book of poetry, always anonymously, always without comment. The turning point arrived on a cold, blustery evening. Clara sat by the fireplace, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. Ethan, after a long day in the fields, sat in his armchair, pretending to read a worn book. The silence was comfortable, a new kind of peace settling between them. Suddenly, Clara gasped, a soft, surprised sound. "He kicked," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. She looked at Ethan, a hesitant invitation in her gaze. For a moment, he hesitated, his heart warring with his ingrained resistance. But the raw vulnerability in her eyes, the sheer joy radiating from her, was irresistible. He slowly rose and knelt beside her, placing his large, calloused hand gently on her belly. After a moment, a faint flutter, a tiny tremor, rippled beneath his palm. It was a sensation unlike any he had ever known, a spark of life, undeniable and profound. A jolt went through him, a warmth spreading through his chest, melting a tiny piece of the ice around his heart. It was the first crack, a nascent connection to a future he hadn't dared to imagine. The fragile peace at Whispering Pines was shattered by an unwelcome ghost from Clara's past. Rodrick Hayes, the biological father, a man as opportunistic as he was charming, reappeared in Harmony Creek. He had heard whispers, distorted tales of Clara's unexpected marriage and the impending birth, and saw an opportunity to exploit her. He arrived at the ranch unannounced, his presence a dark cloud over the newfound tranquility. Ethan found Rodrick cornering Clara in the barn, his voice a low, menacing growl. Rodrick demanded money, threatening to expose Clara's past, to claim the child and ruin her reputation. Clara, her face pale with fear, tried to stand her ground, but her voice trembled. Ethan, witnessing the scene, felt a surge of primal fury. The protective instinct that had flickered to life now blazed into a fierce inferno. He stepped forward, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over Rodrick. "Get off my property." Ethan's voice was a low rumble, laced with an authority that brooked no argument. Rodrick, surprised by Ethan's sudden appearance and his unwavering stance, tried to bluster, to assert his supposed rights. But Ethan stood firm, his eyes cold and unwavering. "This woman is my wife, and that child is mine. You have no claim here." The confrontation was brief but decisive. Rodrick, realizing he had met his match, slunk away, defeated. As he disappeared down the dusty road, Ethan turned to Clara, his expression softening. He saw the gratitude and relief in her eyes, and in that moment, their partnership, born of convenience, solidified into a true, unyielding bond. They were a united front against the world, a family forged in adversity. The Montana winter descended with a vengeance, blanketing Whispering Pines in a thick, unforgiving layer of snow. A fierce blizzard raged, cutting off the ranch from Harmony Creek, isolating them completely. It was on this night, amidst the howling winds and swirling snow, that Clara went into labor. The contractions, initially sporadic, quickly intensified, signaling the imminent arrival of their child. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped Ethan. The nearest doctor was miles away, unreachable through the impassable roads. He was alone, with Clara, and a life hanging in the balance. He remembered Sarah's labor, the fear, the joy, the helplessness. But this time, there was no doctor, no experienced hands to guide them. He had to be that person. He boiled water, gathered clean cloths, and with a surprising calmness born of sheer desperation, began to follow Clara's instructions, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, effort, and raw emotion. Ethan, his face grim with concentration, coached Clara through each contraction, wiping her brow, offering words of encouragement he hadn't known he possessed. He saw her strength, her resilience, and a profound respect bloomed in his heart. Finally, with a last, powerful push, a cry pierced the storm's roar. A baby boy, small but strong, entered the world. Ethan, his hands trembling, cut the umbilical cord, his eyes filled with an overwhelming mix of relief, awe and a love so fierce it stole his breath. Clara, exhausted but radiant, looked at him, a silent question in her eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, "for Pastor Miller." Ethan nodded, tears blurring his vision. The birth of Thomas, amidst the raging blizzard, was a miracle that shattered the last of Ethan's emotional barriers. His heart, once a frozen wasteland, was now overflowing with a warmth and purpose he thought he had lost forever. Weeks later, the blizzard had receded, replaced by the gentle thaw of spring. The world seemed reborn, and so too was Ethan Vance. The christening ceremony for baby Thomas was held at the small church in Harmony Creek, a joyous occasion that drew the entire community. Clara, radiant in a simple white dress, held Thomas, a tiny bundle of innocence, in her arms. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her back, a quiet strength emanating from him. Pastor Miller, his eyes twinkling with warmth, began the ceremony. When it came time for the declaration, Ethan stepped forward, his voice clear and strong, echoing through the hushed church. "I, Ethan Vance, publicly claim this child, Thomas Vance, as my son." His gaze met Clara's, and in that moment, all the unspoken words, all the shared struggles, all the nascent affection, converged into a single, profound truth. He then turned to the congregation, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. "And to my wife, Clara," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "you and Thomas were not a punishment, nor a burden. You were my salvation. You brought light back into my life, and I love you both more than words can say." A collective sigh of happiness rippled through the church. The journey that had begun with a pact of convenience, born of desperation and duty, had blossomed into a true love story. Ethan, once lost in the echoes of his past, had found redemption in the most unexpected of places. Clara, once facing ruin, had found a home, a family, and a love that transcended circumstance. As the sun streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the new family, it was clear that Whispering Pines was no longer a monument to sorrow, but a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of love and the promise of a new dawn.